Welcome to this deep dive. We unpack cutting-edge research in machine learning, and today we're looking at a really interesting new paper.
Yeah, this one's called RoMA, Scaling Up Mamba-based Foundation Models for Remote Sensing.
Exactly. And for anyone tracking AI and Earth observation, this feels like a significant step. It's from researchers at several Chinese universities.
It really does, because it tackles a problem lots of people in the field are bumping up against.
Which is?
Well, it's the limitations of vision transformers, ViTs, when you try to feed them these enormous high-resolution remote sensing images.
Right, like those satellite pictures that are, 4,000 by 4,000 pixels?
Yeah.
Sometimes even bigger.
Exactly. And the way ViTs work with that self-attention mechanism where everything looks at everything else.
It just explodes computationally at that scale, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The processing, the memory.
Precisely. That's the quadratic complexity problem we hear about. The cost just skyrockets as the image gets bigger.
So this paper looks at Mamba. That's a newer architecture, right? And it boasts linear complexity.
That's the key, linear complexity. So it's much, much more efficient. It handles the data sequentially, kind of like reading a sentence, instead of that all pairs comparison ViTs do.
The potential for speed and memory savings sounds huge.
It is. But here's the catch, or at least the gap the paper identified. Mamba has been used in remote sensing before, but mostly for specific supervised tasks.
Meaning you need labeled data and maybe on smaller data sets.
Exactly. It hadn't really been scaled up using self-supervised learning on those massive unlabeled data sets that people have been using to build the big VIP foundation models.
Okay, so that's where RoMA comes in.
Right. RoMA, that stands for Rotation-Aware Multi-Scale Auto-Regressive Learning. It's their novel framework to pre-train these Mamba models using tons of unlabeled remote sensing data.
So the goal is to let Mamba learn general features from all that data, which can then be used for specific tasks later.
Precisely. Building a foundational model, but with Mamba.
Yeah, and you mentioned rotation-aware and multi-scale. Those sound like specific adaptations for remote sensing data.
They are. Very clever ones, actually. The rotation-aware part tackles the fact that objects in satellite images, buildings, fields, whatever, can appear at any angle.
Unlike photos we take where gravity usually orients things, right?
Exactly. So RoMA uses adaptive cropping to focus on important bits and then actually encodes the orientation information. It learns that an airplane is an airplane no matter which way it's pointing on the tarmac.
That makes a lot of sense. And multi-scale.
That deals with the huge variation in object sizes. You might have tiny cars and massive forests in the same shot. RoMA predicts image tokens like the next little patch, but it does it at different levels of detail simultaneously.
Capturing both the fine details and the bigger picture.
You got it. It helps understand context.
And the results they're showing.
Pretty compelling. The RoMA pre-trained Mamba models seem to outperform ViT models in accuracy on several key tasks.
Like scene classification, change detection, segmentation.
Right. All the standard benchmarks.
Yeah.
And crucially, they do it using significantly less compute and memory.
Which is huge for actually deploying these things in the real world. Faster analysis, less hardware needed.
Definitely. Okay, maybe we should step back for a second and put this in context. Historically, CNNs, convolutional neural networks, were king in computer vision, including remote sensing.
Yeah, they're great at local patterns.
Then came ViTs, and they were a big leap because they could capture long-range dependencies, how distant parts of an image relate. That was a big deal for understanding broader scenes.
But as we said, that power came at a cost. That quadratic scaling bottleneck with the two failure. Especially bad for remote sensing with its giant images.
Exactly. And that's the opening Mamba and state space models more generally stepped into. They offered a way to model long sequences, initially making waves in NLP, but with linear complexity.
Much more efficient.
Much more. So people started adapting Mamba for vision Mamba, other variants, and applying it to remote sensing. But again, mostly supervised stuff.
Right. The missing piece was leveraging all that unlabeled data with self-supervised learning, the way ViTs had done so successfully.
And that's precisely the niche RoMA fills. It's designed to bring Mamba's efficiency to large-scale, self-supervised pre-training, specifically for the unique challenges of Earth observation data.
Okay, so let's dig into the RoMA method itself. They use an auto-regressive approach.
Yeah. Think of it like language models predicting the next word. Here, it's predicting the next patch or token in an image based on the sequence of patches seen so far.
And this fits Mamba better than something like mask image modeling, which is popular for ViTs.
That's what they argue. Masking parts of the image and predicting them, like MAE or MIM does, kind of disrupts the sequential processing that Mamba is built for. Auto-regressive prediction, building the sequence step by step, aligns much better.
Makes sense. So the RoMA framework builds on that idea.
Right. They extend prior work like IGPT, but add a specific KV cache mechanism. The Mamba encoder processes the image, generates these key and value representations.
Sort of like the model's memory of the image content.
Kind of, yeah. Then a learnable query vector is used to predict the next token, and they calculate the loss based on how close that prediction is to the actual next token.
And the two core innovations are layered on top of that, the rotation and multi-scale strategies.
Exactly. Let's talk rotation first. Remote sensing images often have, lots of empty space or uniform areas, plus that rotation issue we mentioned.
So how do they adapt?
They use a feature descriptor LBP, local binary patterns, is the default to find the interesting patches, the ones with texture and detail.
So it focuses the learning on the important parts.
Yeah. Then around these key patches, it tries different region sizes and picks the one that seems richest in features. Then, crucially, it applies random rotations to these chosen regions during pre-training.
And how do they avoid losing info at the corners when they rotate?
Ah, clever bit. They crop the largest possible square inside the rotated region, and they add learnable angle embeddings, basically signals that tell the model about the rotation it needs to understand.
So the model learns to be rotation invariant, or at least rotation aware.
Precisely. And they do this without modifying the core Mamba architecture, which is also neat.
Okay, and the multi-scale prediction, what's the challenge there?
Well, auto-regressive models need a 1D sequence, but images are 2D. Just flattening the image into a long line of patches can lose spatial context, how things relate nearby, which is super important in remote sensing.
You lose the up-down, left-right relationships.
Sort of, yeah. So RoMA doesn't just predict the next token at the base patch level. It also looks at features aggregated from deeper layers in the Mamba decoder.
Like looking at coarser-grained views of the image.
Exactly, more abstract representations. And it tries to predict pixel values even at these coarser scales using small helper networks, MLPs.
So it's predicting details and broader structures simultaneously.
Right. It helps retain that spatial understanding despite the 1D processing. There's a combined loss function balancing the next token prediction and these multi-scale predictions weighted by a parameter, lambda.
Okay, that makes sense. Did they also investigate how well Mamba actually scales with more data or bigger models in this remote sensing context, like people showed for ViTs?
They did. They ran experiments increasing the amount of pre-training data from around 60,000 images up to 4 million.
Yeah. Did performance improve?
Yep. Clear improvements on downstream tasks as the pre-training dataset got bigger. They also tested different model sizes, tiny, small, base, large Mamba variants.
Similar trend. Bigger model, better results.
Generally, yes. Performance increased going from tiny to base. The Mamba large didn't show quite as much gain, but they suggest that might be because they didn't pre-train it for long enough, given its size. So the scaling potential seems to be there.
Interesting. And what about the actual experiments? What did they test it on?
They pre-trained a Mamba-based model on their big dataset, optical RS4M. Then they evaluated it on downstream tasks. Scene classification using datasets like AID and UCM, change detection on OSCD, and semantic segmentation on SpaceNet V1.
And compared it against?
Against ViT-based foundation models pre-trained with methods like MAE, MoCo, SatMAE plus Celis, and also against Mamba models pre-trained using methods designed for natural images.
And RoMA came out on top.
Yes. According to their results in Table 2, RoMA consistently outperformed the ViT-based methods, often by a decent margin, especially considering the efficiency gains.
Any areas where the advantage was less clear?
They noted the gains were a bit less pronounced in semantic segmentation compared to classification or change detection. They think that might be because RoMA focuses on predicting patch-level targets, which might not be perfectly optimal for dense pixel-level segmentation. Still good, just less of a leap.
Makes sense. Did they do ablation studies to confirm the rotation and multi-scale parts were actually helping?
They did. They tested different components on the Million-A dataset. Turning off either the adaptive rotation encoding or the multi-scale prediction resulted in a significant performance drop.
So both parts are important.
Seems so. They also tested different feature descriptors for the rotation part, LBP was best, different numbers of patch sizes for cropping, different thresholds, the weighting factor lambda basically confirming their design choices were effective.
Good to see that rigor. So the paper concludes that RoMA is basically the first framework to really scale Mamba effectively for remote sensing using self-supervised auto-regressive learning.
That's the main claim, highlighting its ability to handle rotation and scale, leverage large unlabeled data, and deliver strong performance with better efficiency than ViTs, and showing that Mamba does seem to follow scaling laws in this domain.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to our novel notions segment. Where could this research go next?
Well, one obvious direction, building on what RoMA does for single images, is integrating time.
So looking at sequences of satellite images over time.
Exactly. Remote sensing is often about change detection, monitoring trends. Could RoMA be adapted to predict not just the next spatial token, but maybe the next token and the next image in a time series?
Like modeling deforestation spread or urban growth directly within the pre-training.
Potentially. Imagine pre-training a Mamba model using time series data, maybe from Sentinel satellites, with a temporally aware RoMA. It would need new ways to handle time in the embeddings and predictions alongside the spatial aspects.
That sounds challenging, but incredibly powerful if it worked. You could potentially forecast changes.
Yeah, huge potential for dynamic Earth observation.
That's another idea.
Another angle is multimodal fusion. RoMA focuses on optical imagery, the kind we see, but satellites capture other data types too, right?
Like SAR radar, which sees through clouds, or thermal infrared.
Exactly. Each sensor gives different information. So could you train a RoMA-like model on combined data streams? Fused optical, SAR, thermal data.
Wow, okay. How would that even work? Different data types, maybe different resolutions?
Big challenges there. You'd need ways to tokenize these different modalities, align them, adapt the rotation and multi-scale ideas. How do you predict the next token when it could be a radar pulse return or a temperature value?
But the payoff could be huge. A model that understands the scene robustly, day or night, clear or cloudy.
Absolutely. Think disaster response, security applications. It could lead to much more holistic foundation models for Earth observation.
Really fascinating possibilities.
Disclaimer, these novel notions are for entertainment and speculative research purposes only.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive on RoMA. The key takeaway seems to be that this framework offers a really promising path for building more scalable and efficient foundation models for remote sensing, using the Mamba architecture.
Yeah, it tackles those core remote sensing challenges, object orientation, varying scales with some clever innovations, and shows strong results compared to the established ViT approaches, plus those crucial efficiency gains.
The potential for improving how we monitor environmental changes, respond to disasters, manage resources, it seems significant.
Definitely. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty details, we really recommend checking out the original paper. We'll put a link in the description.
And it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? As we get swamped with more and more Earth observation data, are frameworks like RoMA going to be the key that finally unlocks a truly global, near real-time understanding of our planet? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.